Today I'm going to visit the largest German military cemetery which is located outside of Germany. I think that a lot of people presume that the German military cemetery in IJsselstein, the Netherlands, is the largest. I was one of them until a colleague of mine told me about the German military cemetery in Lommel Belgium, where I am right now. I started doing some research about this cemetery and I was blown away by the number of deaths that are buried here and the size of this cemetery, because if you stand here and you take a look, you are blown away by the actual size of this cemetery. After the Germans invaded the Netherlands, Belgium and France on and after 10th of May 1944 and eventually pushed the British troops all the way back to Dunkirk, during these battles around 2,000 German soldiers were killed in action. They were buried on cemeteries of World War I and small temporarily cemeteries. But as we all know, when the Allies landed in Normandy and pushed all the way through Belgium and the Netherlands, and eventually the battles in and around Aachen, Germany started, also the Battle of the Hürtgen Forest and the Battle of the Bulge, a lot of German soldiers were killed in action, and by the Geneva Convention, all slain had and have the right to be properly buried, also in foreign countries. So the Americans buried them temporarily on their cemeteries, such as Henry Chapelle, Vosse and Overrepe, which of Henry Chapelle is the only one still existing. And just after the war in 1946-1947, all the German soldiers were reburied on this cemetery in Lommel, and with just under 40,000 soldiers, this ultimately became the largest German cemetery, which is located outside of Germany, in Western Europe that is. I just told you guys that there are just under 40,000 German soldiers buried here, 39,111 to be precise. But just like in other German cemeteries, the fallen soldiers are also buried in pairs on this cemetery. Not on top of each other, just like in other cemeteries, but on opposite sides of each other. For an example, this one is Wilhelm Gerken on this side, and if I go to the other side, the same headstone is Werner Klaus on this side. So there are just under 20,000 headstones, but yeah, you have to imagine if there were nearly 40,000 headstones on this cemetery. Some other facts that I presume not a lot of people know about is that this cemetery represents 50 nationalities, such as German, Dutch, Belgium, Polish, Russians, and much more. Also, there are 6,400 unidentified soldiers who are buried on the cemetery. And to make things worse, there are also 1,200 child soldiers buried on this cemetery. And between all these 20,000 tombstones, there are 483 soldiers from World War I buried. They were reburied from the cemetery in Leopoldsburg, which is a few kilometers away. And they got their final resting place here in Lommel on this cemetery. What you see here is a memorial cross that used to be on the exact center line of this cemetery. But by the continuously recovering of fallen German troops, they had to expand this cemetery from 42 plots to 63 plots. so this memorial cross is no longer on the exact center line of this cemetery. But if you take a look in the distance, over there is a crypt at the entrance of this cemetery, and they built that one on the exact new center line of this cemetery. This is the crypt at the entrance of the German cemetery. It was designed by Mr. Tisler and is around 6 meters high. But with the construction of this cemetery, there used to be plot 60. So all the Germans who were laying on plot 60 had to be reburied to plot 53. And this is the result. I myself find it quite beautiful. I have never seen anything like it on a German cemetery. So yeah, let's go take a look. When you're walking around on this cemetery, you can still see that a lot of graves are being visited by, I think, relatives. But yeah, I myself find it quite beautiful that these people are not forgotten, because yeah, a fact is that the most of the Germans who are laying here also were just doing their job and weren't bad people at all. So yeah, I find it beautiful that they still get visitors. One last thing that I want to share with you guys is that this cemetery was handed over to the German War Grave Service in 1952. But by that time the ground of this cemetery was totally destroyed by the continuously excavations, with a result that with heavy wind large sand clouds would fly over this cemetery. And to remedy this, they built earth walls around this cemetery, as you can see behind me, with a total of 1100 meters. And in that same year, 1952, they also started restoring this cemetery as it is today, with the planting of trees, plants, grass, all those kinds of things, just to make it look like a proper and somewhat beautiful cemetery again. I hope you find it an interesting story that I told you about this somewhat unknown German military cemetery in Lommel. But for now, have a good day, and I hope you'll join me on my next travel to history. See you later.